Hello again, everybody, and welcome inside the Howitzer and Buzzsaw Show. I am George, the Howitzer Gerbo.
And I am Mike, the Buzzsaw Asti.
Sports Talk back with you as we wrap up the NFL draft and transition into the spring season, one of many championship seasons that we get to cover in the sports world, and one that's going a little, to plan, which is kind of strange. Sometimes we get crazy championship seasons. This one so far, it's a little bit chalky, Mike. In the first
So
couple of
far,
weeks.
so far,
We'll see how that continues to develop. The first time in nearly 2 decades, at least in basketball, that you won't have LeBron James or Steph Curry or
yeah.
Kevin Durant as part of it. And the first time, not the first time, but first of many times recently that you won't have Alex Ovechkin or Sidney Crosby in it on the hockey side. We got new names out there making.
Last year was the first time. This is
Yes.
another time. Ovechkin did get in, but didn't get a point and didn't advance, and they didn't win anything. And then Crosby didn't make it. So, yeah, you don't have the major stars and the name recognition, and it always generates the conversation. What will the ratings be? Because the casual fan is probably less interested if you don't have the major teams, the major brands, the major stars that everybody knows. However, regardless of whether the casual fan wants to watch or not, there are people watching. I'm entertained, and there's a lot of great games, last second shots that are winning these games, and a lot going on in both the NBA playoffs and the Stanley Cup playoffs, and even some of the NHL's first round. It's heating up and it's getting a little bit more interesting than usual, but or at least in recent memory, in the past, they've had some upsets in the first round, and the NBA's having some of that too. Usually, we talked about last show, the NBA usually is chalk in the first round. It's getting to be chalk, but you're seeing some intriguing matchups and series dragging out at least. That's making it interesting.
Yeah, you've got many series in the hockey side of things already decided, only taking 4 or 5 games.
Right.
Edmonton has advanced. The Rangers have advanced in a sweep, of course, over the aforementioned Capitals. The Carolina Hurricanes have advanced. Colorado has advanced.
I am sick of seeing the same teams beat the same teams every year, though, because we're getting that now in the NHL. That now we're a decade into this format. It is getting to be, I believe, even 3-4 years in a row for some of these matchups, and I'm getting a little tired with that. But the NBA has been different.
Yeah, we'll visit that here in a little bit about the division format in the NHL, which guarantees division matchups. But as Mike points to, sometimes
it's the same teams, though.
Sometimes you already seen the division matchup and just like, what are you going to do? Shout out to the Stars and Golden Knights series, which has probably been the most interesting in all of hockey. Vegas was up 2-0, and Dallas has stormed back and won 3 straight, and now holds the lead in that series. Behind their talented young team, Jake Ottinger in goal, Jason Richardson with the goal last night. So, yeah, you got a lot to go. Basketball as well. You've got some of our same friends that have advanced, including the Serbian nightmare, Nikola Jokic. We'll see who joins him in the rest of the brackets. The Celtics will on the eastern side. We've got some other games, other series that still need to be played out there. But before we get to that, we'll remind you first that you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. That includes on Apple, Google, Spotify, and more. Just search Howitzer or Howitzer Buzzsaw wherever you get your podcasts. And a reminder to check out all of our podcasts and all of our podcasts of our friends at the Hyphen Podcast Group, at Hyphen Podcast Group on Twitter, Instagram, other socials, and online for all the pods there.
Of course, you can find us throughout social media. On X is the one that George didn't mention there. Literally X, formerly Twitter, but literally X, formerly Twitter, Instagram, etc. Threads, even if you want to go there. At Mike Asti 11, at Gerbo 3, of course, at Howitzer Buzzsaw for the show. And if you can't find us anywhere you get your podcast, because we are available everywhere you get your podcast, then you, of course, are not trying hard enough. And not only do we have a lot of game action to discuss in both the postseasons of the NHL and the NBA, and even some controversy that we didn't get into there in the open, that some of these games have been controversial, which makes it more interesting, even if you're getting the same matchups and same teams, and had some key injuries too. But we now are finally in the aftermath of the NFL draft season that felt like it went on forever. And now we get, okay, teams have new rosters together. What are they going to do? We get into rookie minicamp and then a full-on off season. Finally, feels like a little bit of an NFL lull, but a lot of interesting things did occur during this past NFL draft, maybe more so than what some would have thought.
Apologies to the social media folks. I finally broken myself of calling them the San Diego Chargers now, 2 years on. It took me about 2 years after they moved from San Diego to Los Angeles proper. So it's going to take a while on the Twitter X stuff. Apologies to the dozens.
Funny enough, though, as journalists, I talked to Will about this too, and that's why I've been copying. The Associated Press now has a fully adopted X, and you can put parentheses, formerly Twitter, if you want, but it's freaking X. And it took until, but once they first became X, that wasn't the case.
It took some time, yes.
It took almost a year where the AP was still throwing up Twitter, but now it doesn't matter whether you like it or not. It is X marks the spot. I do still throw up the formerly Twitter, but I feel like that's going to have to go away soon as well. Because
that's why I usually end up in official copy. I'll just use the general social media, quote unquote, catch-all term.
You can, but I've been caught a few times doing that, and then you see somebody try to tease something on one platform and not put it on the other platform. Yeah. So it's not a guarantee things are everywhere if you just do that. But that's to try to get away. You can do that because the awkwardness in writing is. Before it was okay, it's on Twitter, it's a tweet, everyone knows these terms, it makes sense. They're in the lexicon, they're borderline dictionary terms now. If you say X, fine, but then what do you call the action? Can you say tweet and X in the same paragraph? Like that doesn't work. It's not is it still a tweet if it's on X? That's the whole rant off of what actually should be written. But I guess factually it's an X and there's nothing. I guess tweets don't exist and there's nothing to cooperate. There's no X post, there's no, or is an X. Maybe X could be both. Maybe X is the company and the action. But nonetheless,
yes,
we are on social media, we are on X, and all of this is on social media and on X.
Draft in the books. Shout out to Detroit. Turned out a record crowd for the event. Upwards of 275,000 people on its first day and 750,000 across the 3 days of the draft in the city. It turned out in the city of Detroit there. The draft moves to division rival Green Bay next year. Be interesting to see that.
Yeah, paving the way for a lot of cold weather locations possibly in the future.
Pittsburgh being one of the places vying for contender of the draft, which would be cool for both of us.
You got to feel like if they give it to Detroit, especially then Green Bay, that Pittsburgh would make sense to get it. I never would have believed they would get it 5-10 years ago.
No,
but now they almost have to. Now it's an historic city and a top 25 market in comparison to where you've been. They almost would have to go there.
You had it in Cleveland a few years ago. You had it in Detroit. You've tagged all the North cities. Kansas City has had it.
Philly's had it. Philly's had it already.
That's right. Philadelphia. So the next in line. And with Pittsburgh not really being, they've tried in the past, or at least the Rooneys have intimated that they would have liked to have a Super Bowl, but there's obviously some restrictions.
That seems less likely, but the draft seems like it's
less likely for a lot of reasons. But the NFL draft is something I think Pittsburgh would pull off very well with its ability to put on showcase events, the Stanley Cup playoffs, the All-Star game's been there.
I could argue that it's cooler to see on TV than going if you're talking about the draft. Sure. Going and being in a sea of people where you eat a burger, drink a beer, and then you hear your draft pick, you yell, and then you wait for 15 minutes. Is that much fun? That's not the same as going to a game. And it's honestly an event that would be very hard to cover unless you lock in a one-on-one. What are you doing there?
What are you doing? Yeah.
Yeah. So the draft, it'll be great for the city if it happens. I do think it will happen for Pittsburgh, maybe even both Pittsburgh, Cleveland, etc. But I do think it's an overrated event to go to as a fan or to cover, to be honest with you.
Fair assessment, yeah.
Either way.
Especially with some of the coverage coming out of it this year where you got people just standing in the crowd like, it's cold and we don't know what we're doing here. And it's like, okay.
It'd be harder to cover. I honestly think you almost would need to forgo it and not go if you're really trying to cover it diligently, or you need somebody at home in a place with actual Wi-Fi that would work, because you're not going to do anything while you're what are you doing? So it'll be great for the location. Hopefully it doesn't rain. The weather is always an issue in certain cities, but I don't know about going. We'll see.
As for the teams in the draft and their selections, a couple rise to the cream of the crop there. Of course, speaking of Pittsburgh, and obviously it's we're in the backyard here, but man, did the Steelers have a good draft in terms of just
best one in a while, I think, and almost unanimously good. Yeah,
and it's like the crazy part of it is, Mike. In I don't want to phrase this wrongly, but like in terms of how long it took Ben Roethlisberger to get out of the picture. That's not like saying force him out, but just like Ben Roethlisberger hanging around. The Steelers are doing the Steeler thing, and they're winning, 8 to 9 games a year. And what does it really profit you in the end? They've not been a contending team for a good period of time now. And
even with bad quarterback play, they won enough to not get a great draft pick. The Mason and Duck year, they were a game out of the playoffs.
Yeah.
And you cannot rebuild and get completely back unless you have a top 10 selection, or you work a trade or you trade up, and they were able to stay where they were. That's the surprising thing that we'll get to. They kind of didn't move, and they had a great draft. But up until this year, they tried to get those early pieces. They did trade up for Devin Bush years ago. They brought in Najee. Kenny Pickett obviously didn't work out as the only first-round QB. So they've tried different things. This, though, was the first year of Omar Khan in charge, not Kevin Colbert, which is really the big deal.
Significant.
It feels like they're more of an aggressive, interesting team, and they did have their best draft in a while, and it finally feels like now they have a new era that they can actually embark on. Granted, contractually, that's not the case for the quarterback room, so who knows what happens next year there. But otherwise, it feels like they're in a better spot than they've been.
Yeah, and you're turning your identity back to a very traditional Pittsburgh Steelers identity, which can make sense in what you've got. Obviously, we know the quarterbacks that they brought in between Russ and Fields, but Torrey Fautanu from Washington, national runner-up this year there in the first round. Guy we love, of course, is Zach Frazier. You've remade your offensive line there. If you bring those guys along and develop them properly, which if you're Najee Harris, who's been kind of a malcontent for the better part of a year plus, that's got to look really exciting for you, especially in...
Depends on how long he's there, but yeah.
Depends on how long he's there, and especially in an R.D. Smith coordinated run offense now.
Sure.
It should be beneficial to him, I would think, going into camp and into the fall. And then the third round selections, Roman Wilson was probably Michigan's best wide receiver on a team that admittedly did not throw and was not vociferously known for it. But Roman Wilson could be a standout given the time and the development. And Peyton Wilson was the Butkus Award winner. I get that he's had injuries and doesn't have an ACL in one of his legs, but guy did that with the guy was the best linebacker in the country last year.
Yeah.
Besides that, and in Pittsburgh,
they haven't had that since Shazier and those guys. Yeah. Like that's the position that has really never been fully replaced. Even when you've had star defensive players, that linebacker room has felt like a weakness for the team for a while. And
you've already got like now. TJ as an edge and whatnot,
sure.
But Peyton Wilson is just a guy who is almost like an AJ Hawk, where it's just like, I'm just going to eat tackles. I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to be like terribly spectacular in certain ways or necessarily game changing. You're just going to be solid at the fundamentals and gobble up guys when they're near you and make good reads. And Pittsburgh also still has Nick Herbig, I believe, in the fold too, who was a rookie out of Wisconsin last year. So I love seeing those Big Ten guys in there because they're generally coming from solid programs that play a lot of defense and play it well. But it seems like a better. It's hard. It's crazy to put that in comparison, Mike, with where they've been in the last 4 years. 2020 is kind of a mirage because they win all those games in a COVID thing, and then the Browns humble them in the first round of the playoffs at home. Roethlisberger comes back. We're still dragging on. Okay, get back to the playoffs, whatever. And this actually feels like the first time now where this team feels positioned for the future. And it hasn't really been positioned for the future. They've been carrying on what was the Steeler way. And this feels like a return to the old Steeler way while also being kind of in the right place at the right time for moving forward in this division.
That's the case, but they tried to do this with the Kenny Pickett draft. They did draft a first-round quarterback. It just didn't work out, and it was probably a reach to have him be the only first-round quarterback that year. He didn't have a great tenure, even though there were moments, but 13 TDs in 2 years is not enough. He did get hurt. You didn't really get to see him without Matt Canada. Tons of drama there. a lot went on. And then once they signed Wilson, which was a low risk thing, there's no reason not to do it when somebody else is paying basically all the money, and you're it doesn't matter if he sucks. You can kind of just say goodbye to him if he's still bad. Pickett got in his feelings off of Wilson, then he's gone. It does feel like they kind of had an about face months ago going into the draft and kind of switched up their original planning. Omar Khan has talked about this, including on McAfee a few days ago, that if Pickett didn't get in his feelings, and this is regardless of whether you believe a report from last year that I do actually believe, but about him not wanting to be a backup, all of that, it doesn't matter.
That late season game where,
but yeah, against Seattle. And again, I've had that confirmed from people. There are some who still don't want to believe it, but I'm not even getting into that debate. It doesn't matter. Omar Khan has said that regardless of that, they were going to go with Pickett into camp and have him learn from Wilson, because at that point, the Fields trade felt like it was too much. Bears wanted a second round pick, things like that. The Bears softened off of what they wanted. They also claimed they did him a favor because he wanted to go to Pittsburgh and be under Tomlin. And then once Pickett kind of got in his feelings, they just said, okay, you can go home. You're never going to play under Hurts. You like Philly, fine. So he went there. So they had to kind of change course, but that's also different than past Steeler regimes. Kevin Colbert, if he had to change course despite success, they probably would have been screwed all year. Omar Khan is changing course as often as people change underwear, and that's a positive thing to try to get this team back. And you have to remember, when you're talking Steelers, this offseason started differently than any other in recent memory. And I'm not talking about finally getting into a new era after Ben Roethlisberger finally. I'm not talking about the offseason where they finally traded up in a draft and that surprised everybody and they got Devin Bush and that clearly hasn't worked out, or when they brought in Najee. They're usually able to be read going into a draft and what they're going to do, but they've done different things in recent memory that are more aggressive than past Steeler regimes, end of Colbert to early Khan. I'm not talking about any of that. What this offseason started with is Rooney coming out there and saying, I'm done with getting in the playoffs and not having a chance. I need a playoff win ASAP or I'm mad. He had not said that any of the other prior off seasons. He may have said it behind closed doors. He may have felt it. He may have said it to his family that he's frustrated. But we got a public directive to all the fans. Everyone is aware he is sick of not winning playoff games. So that is likely what led to, and different things fell in their lap as well, the quarterback room being totally shaken up, different things going on now. And they did have players fall in their laps. They had a great draft. They've had a solid offseason. They do trade Deontay Johnson. That's maybe an issue of, is that really getting replaced in the draft or anywhere else? Because there's still rumors of them getting a veteran. I don't believe that. But third, fourth rounder replacing Deontay's production as a vet, not going to happen. If they don't get a vet, is that the weak spot? You have George Pickens. He could ascend. Do you need a number two? Usually teams that have a one and then it's a drop-off, the defense can just double cover that guy, make his life hell, and then what are you going to do there? So is that an issue, or do you go back to kind of being a ground and pound team and just sprinkle to whatever to George that you can give him? To that end, George, there's going to be a lot of fans, this will happen. They're going to, every game the Steelers lose, then people that are going to scream, yeah, they finally drafted smarter, but they're going old school. It's modern NFL. You got to throw the ball. You can't do Steelers football from the 70s in 2024. So maybe they're getting back to that more. They certainly have mobile QBs now, like they even had with Pickett. But if that's the recipe, that will likely piss off Pickens at some point, and fans maybe will get annoyed. So we'll see. But you could also get an explosive offense depending on what they do. A lot of this will depend on how this unravels in the offseason. The draft was great, though, and I do also think, last point on the Steelers, while they had a great draft, I think they got lucky as well, which you have to in drafts. I was saying on shows, and I look dumb, but I still stand by all this. I thought going into the draft, if they wanted Zach Frazier, and everybody knew, you don't have to cover the program to know this. Everyone knew the Steelers love Zach Frazier. They tip their hand. They love him. But I thought that if they were going to get Zach Frazier, they couldn't. I knew that was never going to be a first round thing, but I didn't think they could sit there at 51 of the second round and get him. I thought he'd be gone earlier in the second round. Once you even saw a center go much earlier than that. But once Powers Johnson went a few picks earlier, then it felt like, okay, Zach Frazier's still there. He did kind of fall. The Steelers weren't going to pass on him. So they got a little bit lucky. They've been open with this. They didn't think he'd still be there. You'd have to wonder how their draft would look if these players did go to what they were projected. If Frazier went earlier and Mel Kiper was right, etc., then what would they have done? What would have been the other pick? But once he fell, once he was there, they were going to take him. And otherwise, you have a player that grew up loving Troy Polamalu. You have a player from the region. They pretty much appeased everybody. They filled the needs. They got the best available, and they got the stupid Pittsburgh Steelers connection thing that some people want. So they had a home run draft, but does that mean they're going to all of a sudden win 13 games and win the AFC? Probably not, but they are in much better position, and it does feel like they're in better position for more than just this coming season, regardless of what happens at QB. But you also got to figure QB play will be, regardless of who's there, and likely Wilson, will be better than it's been in recent years. And I would also say here, the Steelers, to me, people can point to the Eagles. You can bring up the Eagles. They always have a great draft. I do think the Steelers, in terms of what they need to do, how they have pressure to finally win a playoff game. It's been a long time for Tomlin and the franchise. I think the Steelers maybe had the best draft. It's an A draft for me. I think they might have had the best draft of everybody. You could argue the Eagles as well, but everything else kind of went what you figured, with Caleb going 1. Maybe people were surprised by Drake May being taken by the Patriots, but I was not. They didn't trade out of that spot. Rumors that maybe they were going to. They do take him. Daniels goes to Washington, number 2. It's like RG3 over again a decade or so later. It kind of feels like the same guy and the same pick. It feels like it makes sense for them because they wanted Caleb, but that was never going to happen. The Bears were going to take him. Caleb was in a great situation now with what goes on with the Bears, even though they never really have an elite QB. And J.J. McCarthy, who I'm not high on, I just haven't seen enough from, is in a solid situation with Minnesota as well. So these QBs got in solid situations. Some of them will fail, but I do think overall, the Bears are another one you could bring up as having a great draft as well. Maybe they had the best draft. You get your QB of the future. You get your receiver of the future. That's both in the top 10 picks of that draft. Obviously, that's a great draft. Maybe Minnesota as well. Those are some teams that did really, really well in this draft. And that can kind of segue to a team that I think is the most befuddling, that some are wondering if they maybe had the worst draft, and that is the Atlanta Falcons. So where do you stand there, I guess, is a question, because obviously they go Michael Penix Jr. as a QB, pick 8 overall. This after last year, we talked about how they were the only team going off the board and taking a running back when nobody else was taking running backs in the first couple rounds in Bijan Robinson. So they go way off a year ago to do something no one else is doing, and they do the Jordan Love, Aaron Rodgers, Green Bay thing, but they tell Kirk Cousins as they're making the pick, he's a little in his feelings. He goes on Shaq's podcast a week earlier and says he's going to be there. He wants to end his career there. He's looking beyond the 2 years. He maybe even wants to play 4 or 5 years. He wants to mimic Brady. And they say, I don't know, Kurt. We're not so sure of the injury. We're paying you $180 million regardless. They bring in the quarterback of the future when they also have some needs now. I don't know. So maybe Steelers had the best draft. Bears had a great draft. Eagles had a great draft. Hard to say Falcons didn't have the worst draft unless you like that decision.
I don't have a problem with Penix in the slot there at 8, because I do think he was deserving of being a top 10 pick, my opinion.
That's something that some analysts have actually said. They did have a problem with him in that slot.
Some people are like, oh, I can't believe it was Penix here. It's like, no. I ain't got no problem with Michael Penix going that high. Like, to me, deserved. And at his age, 24,
right.
Is great for him to step in and take a role with a little bit more maturity and all that he's been through from Indiana. And people will forget, because who was watching those games, but resurrected Indiana football. If there was
no one remembers that at all. No,
exactly. If there was even a resurrection to be had, meaning they had to have been alive at some point to begin with. Multiple knee injuries, of course, which maybe knocks him down a couple pegs in some people's minds, but does what he does there, ends up at Washington, and behind Coach Kalen DeBoer, they go and make a run all the way to the national championship. The befuddling thing with Atlanta,
injury issues, though, is what people bring up.
Sure, injury issues, yes. You look at I liked the Bijan pick last year, because it's like he was give me one running back that is going to be a game-changing type of guy in last year's draft, and it was Bijan Robinson. Now, they didn't utilize like they should have last year, because they were quarterback bingo with Ritter and Marcus Mariota or whatever the hell they were doing down there last year.
I mean, quickly, my issue with it last year, though, as we said on this show, it was nothing to do with him as a player.
Wasn't a need.
The issue is exactly what you brought up with Najee Harris, even at the open of the show. And I said, well, it matters on how long he'll be there, because we are now going into 4 years of Najee Harris, and no running back signs their second deal with the team that drafts them in this day and age. This does not happen, because if they're great, they want more money. You don't pay a running back position anymore. If they're not great, you then let them go. So that's a car wash position that anyone who's 30 years old, they're no longer good enough in the eyes of the NFL teams. They don't get big money usually. People are paying less to running backs. If you take a running back in the first round, anyone you take in the first round, you got to figure you're going to sign them to a second deal, and they're going to be there for 5+ years. It's just very rare and unlikely with a running back. And I had to bet, if I had to bet now, George, if you would even bet, if Bijan Robinson will be on that team in 2 years from now, I would say no. That's just not how it is. If he is still, great. If not, then it's not worth the pick. That's the issue with taking him, not so much him as a player, which they did misuse. But even if they used him perfectly and he had 2,000 yards on the ground and was O.J. Simpson out there, I would still argue that I don't know about the pick. But they did it, and then they do this again. They're the confusing team for 2 straight years.
The timeline doesn't work. Like, if you thought Minnesota is also confusing, which I'll tie this in here. If you're
keeping Jefferson and you bring in JJ, though, it's not that bad. But yeah.
Well, sure, but they brought in what's his face, Sam Darnold too, and it's like,
well, he's just a bridge. He's nothing.
But then like JJ seems like a guy that could be the sit and develop guy, and so it'd be a reach if Atlanta took him at 8, but it makes more sense in terms of the development track if you believed in JJ McCarthy that much to take him at 8.
Yeah,
Michael Penix, if we go 3 years into this Kirk Cousins deal or whatever, he's 27 at that point. And
well, say 2 years though, because Kirk Cousins makes $45 million after in his second year, and then it's like 25, third year, 27. Right. It's a big drop off. You can get out of the money in the third year.
So we'll go 26. And so Michael Penix will be 26 and presumably have 0 NFL experience in terms of
presumably,
regular starting quarterback, save for snaps in blowouts and whatnot.
Sure.
And it's just like, okay,
he's not do it with a 21-year-old.
I got this asset. He's my quote unquote quarterback of the future. And I'm projected forward again, fantasy projected forward, Mike. And he'll be you maybe get 8 or 10s on the long end of it. Let's say you get 8 years, but you draft, why you've fast forwarded 3 years of because of his age, because of how old he is and how I think he has developed and could actually insert himself in a system right now and play as a rookie. You don't have that in Atlanta because he'll be 26 before he gets the reins. And if you pretend that he's Atlanta's quarterback for the next decade, then he's 36 and about to retire.
Well, I mean, at 36 is Kirk Cousins' age, so then I guess in today's day and age, you would be able to stay for the
sure, maybe I'm truncating him a little bit, but it's just like, no, Kurt was and mainly the investment in Kirk Cousins. Like everybody knew he was going to, as Andrew Brandt likes to say, Hall of Famer in the realms of quarterback finance, finance Hall of Famer.
Oh yeah,
the number of contracts that he's gotten from being a 3rd round pick, picked in this, as you mentioned, picked in the same draft behind Robert Griffin III, and then gets in Washington, balls out in Washington. The Commanders' unsettled franchise as they've been for most of the last 20 years. He ends up in Minnesota, leads them to a string of wins, no playoff successes, fine. Gets dinged for his primetime record, fine. But there are wins to be had. There's a division title there and a whole bunch of touchdowns. So the output is there. And now you go to Atlanta. I still believe he's going to do those things, especially if you can revive.
If he's healthy, 4,000 yards, 25 TDs at minimum. I don't. And last year he was hurt, but I don't see any reason. If you look at 2 years ago, the only ding on him is there's not been that much playoff success. But if you look at the teams as well, how great of teams have been around him, he puts up numbers. Yes. And the idea of getting Kirk Cousins. And it was even brought up by him. He compared himself to this move. And I don't think the team was as stacked, but the idea of getting Kirk Cousins was the same idea of the Rams bringing in Matthew Stafford a few years ago. This is a guy that Matthew Stafford was a compiler. People will argue he's a Hall of Famer, but he never could win. Detroit never got enough around him. Oh, you get him here. We win with him right away. He's now going to Hall of Fame. Now, granted, Aaron Donald and everybody around him certainly helped lead the way. He finally got a crew around him, but the NFC South is very winnable. The Buccaneers won that division last year with Baker Mayfield as a comeback player, but everything around them was not nearly as great. Mike Evans and him pretty much led the way. The Buccaneers were vocally saying, even in pressers a year before that they knew they get Brady, they win a ring. They knew they mortgaged the future to do it. They were probably going to have to rebuild and be bad for a while, but they got that ring. And Baker came in and said, no, let's go to the playoffs and win a division anyway. Like he kind of set that course off track from what they even expected. But if I'm the Falcons, I would say, what, they have like 7 wins? Mm-hmm. They weren't far.
No.
For me, I'm like, okay.
They were in Arizona.
Yeah, so like you won the division, barely getting in double-digit wins with a player that nobody believed could do that with an average team. I was a couple wins away from being you with no one at quarterback. With Desmond Ridder and company, we had no hope at QB. If I get a perennial Pro Bowler, I don't care about the past. If I get a perennial Pro Bowler who can throw 4,000 yards and 25 TDs when healthy with this crew around him, I, at minimum, am winning this division. At minimum. Even if I lose right away in the playoffs, I am winning this division. And likely, if I get 11, 12 wins, I'm going to get a bye. I'm only going to have to win a couple games getting the Super Bowl. I'm not saying I would pick them to go ahead and hoist Lombardi, but they are in a solid position to make a run and have the best season the franchise has had since the year they lost the Super Bowl to the Patriots and blew that 23 lead.
So it just creates makes it dynamic. It makes it
dynamic. They're going to be interesting. They would get a national.
Minnesota, it's what Christian Ponder, is the quarterback, and like nobody's afraid of that. But like Kirk Cousins there with the weapons he had, but Kirk Cousins there gives you a different dimension, and him going to Atlanta gives Atlanta a better dimension than Desmond Ridder or Marcus Mariota.
Yeah, but this is all of the reasons. Like you articulate the reasons contractually because of his age. That number one, if you're going to do the quarterback and waiting thing, like a Jordan Love or even Kirk Cousins under RG3, which I contend because that was brought up a lot. It is different because, as you mentioned, Kirk Cousins, by the way, was a 4th round pick, not a 3rd. So that's not the same as a 1st round guy. It's not the same as taking somebody 8th overall. That's different. So you want to do the same thing as those teams. Okay. But as you're saying, the guy that Jordan Love wasn't 24, almost 25 years old at the time. You're bringing in somebody that is well old enough to play. He's done enough. He's had games under his belt. It's not like this is not like Mark Sanchez out of USC where he played like 10 games because he was always a backup. You got a lot of body of work of Big Ten football, then Pac-12 football. You're going to the national title game. Maybe he wasn't as great all those years, but you got a lot of experience. He's 24 years old. That's the recipe usually of guys that can go in right away and have success. And George, there might be growing pains. It's not like 24-year-old Michael Penix Jr., who'll be 25 when the season starts. Maybe with Kirk Cousins, you win 12 games, win the division. With Penix, you're going to throw a pick or two you don't want to. Growing pains, faster pace. You go ahead and win 7 games. You're not good enough, and then next year you hit. It depends on what path you want to be on. But if you want to be on the path of winning right now with Kirk Cousins, and okay, you want to get your guy for the future, you do it as a 3rd or 4th rounder. You do it as somebody maybe who's 20, 21 years old that you can have sit under Kirk Cousins. But if you have Kirk Cousins and figure he's going to throw 4K, and you figure that you're going to have him at least 2 years, because even if you don't want to do the full 4-year contract, George, the money, you'd be eating a lot of money if he sucks before that, because it's $45 million in the 2nd year. It's a lot more in the 1st year. It's $180 million overall. It's $100 guaranteed, I believe. So a lot of money to him. And you got to figure it's going to be at least good quarterback play that's been better than what you have and kind of what he did 2 years ago. If that's your plan, then separate from how it'll screw you contractually and how Penix will be hurt, it's the fact that, George, if I'm Kirk Cousins, which is kind of what he's put out through his agent, I had the understanding, he's even said, he knew at some point here, they maybe would do a Kirk Cousins RG3 thing. Maybe they would take a 4th round quarterback. Maybe they would take a quarterback next year. He was aware of that being a possibility. But he thought, we're trying to win a championship now. So, yeah, there's weapons to your receivers and running back, George. They had the worst pass rush in football. Go ahead and trade back and get a defensive player. Or a Doomsday, another receiver would be great. He would have been available. Like, there were options that would make you way better for now, of impact guys for now. And if you're Kirk Cousins at 36, who still can play at a high level, you want to have your team be best suited to win now. And yeah, you don't want the Falcons to be screwed quarterback-wise later, which is why they did it. But if you're trying to win a title, you got to seize the day. If you're trying to win a title, this is it. So you want to get as many guys as you can for now, plus the age of Penix Jr., plus the contract. All of these things make it not make any sense, George. And for me, when you heard the pick, Penix Jr. put the hat on, he's smiling. They're asking him about, growing up and even admiring the franchise. Everyone loved Vic and all of that. If I'm him deep down, I would say, like you're saying, nah, this ain't going to work. Because unless Kirk Cousins gets hurt in early training camp or really sucks, and then that hurts you really money-wise for the future of your franchise because of what you did pay him, if you're Penix Jr. at 24, what's the percentage chance he plays anything but mop-up duty next year? 1% outside of an injury. Okay. The next year, I'll up it to 8% or like 10%, but you got to figure Kurt is still going to be good at 37 if he's healthy. So separate from injuries, which changes all of that, if I'm Penix Jr., I'm going to be watching J.J. McCarthy probably play next year, maybe the end of this coming season. He'll be 21, 22. I'm 24, more accomplished, and I'm going to be sitting. And I get all these guys have, maybe even Patrick Mahomes. He sat under Alex Smith. It worked. Great. They were younger. As you're saying, Penix Jr. is not going to get in until 26 years old. And then, George, what's the issue now with contracts that it wasn't always the case in the NFL? You draft a guy, after a couple years, you have to decide about that fifth-year option. That was Justin Fields' whole issue. So are you going to be signing somebody and deciding about the fifth-year option before they even played a couple years in? That seems like that's not going to work and doesn't make sense either. So, I mean, we just detailed here in 5 minutes like 7 reasons why this makes no sense. I mean, do you as a Packer fan, do you think this is similar to Love and Rodgers? Because at that time, Rodgers was vocally mad. Everybody was against it. It clearly has worked out now for the Packers, which is all they will care about as the drafting team. I still don't buy it because of ages, and I also don't think it's exactly similar.
It's not, because Rodgers had been with the franchise a decade plus prior to it when they drafted Jordan Love and had won a Super Bowl. And they hadn't immediately paid him $100 million. And as you mentioned, Michael Penix, his
money
birthday,
there too. Yeah. They didn't just pay him $100 million.
Michael Penix's birthday is next week. Jordan Love is a year older than him and going into his second full season will be.
So how old was Jordan Love when he was drafted, though, is what the argument is.
So what, 4 years? Jordan Love is 25 right now, so 21 when he was drafted.
So, but Penix is 24 at the time of the draft.
Penix will turn 24 on May 8th.
Well, give or take, but he's about to be 24.
Yeah,
when being taken.
Correct.
That's what I'm saying. The Packers did it with a 21-year-old. That's different.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, so Jordan Love is a year older than him and has more than a year older than him, a couple months tacked onto that, but year older and has a playoff victory on the road over Dallas under his belt already. And
sure, I mean, no one predicted that going into the season.
No, sure, but there's demonstrated success that guy's already had because he went through the maturation development process at nearly the same age as the guy you just took, who's going to presumably sit for at least 1, if not 2 years. No, none of it makes any.
That is what they're thinking, though, of what you just detailed. That they're in their brains, they tried to articulate this too in their presser. They're thinking, they brought up the Packers that. Okay, we want Kirk to be great for the next couple of years. We believe he can be great. Maybe we'll win a championship. Maybe we won't. We'll win a division. Maybe we won't. But after those couple of years, then we'll have Penix in. He'll do the Love thing. And yeah, we're giving up a lot more money than the Packers because they didn't just give a mega deal. They already had him in the middle of one, whereas we're giving it to Kirk. But we'll be set up for the future as well as being able to win now. That's their idea. I think the fifth-year thing being in play now makes it a little bit different as well. You have to make that decision without seeing him play. I mean, the Bears didn't want to make a decision on Fields, and he played. You're going to be making a decision on a guy without seeing him play? That seems wild. And then in addition to that, the other issue is, they're a couple years different in age. If they would have drafted J.J. McCarthy Well, number one, I would still have a problem with it, but I would understand a little bit more because he'd be a younger quarterback that needed to sit. But I do want to make this clear. Even if they drafted J.J. McCarthy at 21 years old, who needs to sit, who's not as experienced, despite his team being great, and maybe he needs to sit under a former Pro Bowler, okay, I get that thinking. If I'm Cousins, I'm still pissed. Like, you want to win now. You need players to win now. You're trying to win now. The division is open now. And George, as much as it worked out for the Packers and Love, when we get a tell-all movie or book or something from Aaron Rodgers in a couple years or 10 years, he's going to absolutely say he thinks he would have won a second ring if they didn't try to work for the future 5 years ago. Like, he vocally said, are you trying to win now or are you trying to win in 4 years? Now, they maturely were trying to do both, but he didn't believe there was enough there to go one step above, and they had that NFC title hump. So, obviously, if the Falcons get in the NFC title game in a couple years in a row, they'll be thrilled with it because it's not been the case in recent memory. But I would predict Kirk to be great next year. I cannot imagine a scenario that he's not good if he's healthy. And
and
if
it's
he's
like
good the next couple years, then it's weird because of Penix's age.
Like the shrewdness there.
And the way they handled it,
at that spot. And as I look at the thing, I wanted to check that again. So the Jets swap immediately with Minnesota, and Minnesota moves up to take McCarthy. Now, I don't know if they would have presumed.
I don't think he fits as much as what they would do.
Sure. But I don't know if McCarthy, if Minnesota, presuming they would have Atlanta could have traded out of this pick potentially. If the Jets weren't going to take a quarterback, Jets move down. They take Olu Fashanu, great offensive tackle, Penn State, a kid from DMV. The other surrounding that, McCarthy to Minnesota and Bo Nix to Oregon. So you had two teams there that were thinking quarterback. Obviously, would the Jets have moved up to 8? I don't know. And then obviously, if Penix was your guy, even though presumably let's pretend Atlanta was going to take a quarterback regardless, even though we don't think.
Well, also, I think we maybe can pretend this, which I think is true. And I know Sean Payton
got somebody to move up and bite there that wasn't Minnesota or Denver for something, Yeah,
cool, because Sean Payton loves Bo Nix. A lot of quarterback people, including when I talked to at the Combine as a former college coach, hated Bo Nix in terms of his prospect. He's very polarizing. So
Bo Nix at 12 was the last quarterback taken until Spencer Rattler went in the 3rd round too, that tells you the gap between what was considered the top tier of people and then the rest.
Yeah, but my point, I guess, was that Sean Payton is so locked into Bo Nix, and he loved Bo Nix so much, and these teams talk to each other and kind of know these things. If you didn't want Bo Nix, and a lot of teams probably didn't, I'm guessing the Falcons he didn't really fit them, then you're not in a situation where you're upset about losing J.J. McCarthy or Bo Nix, basically. It almost felt like to the Falcons, and kind of what they've been saying too, that Penix was the guy they wanted. I would imagine, George, off of what you're saying, that if they could not get Penix for whatever reason, say these other teams did get him, or they traded up to get him, or they loved him so much, etc., then maybe they don't do this. It seemed like that Penix was their guy, and that Penix being there is why they pulled the trigger and went for the future instead of the present, and then worried about the present later on in the draft. But Penix was their guy, and they may not have done this for anybody else. That's how it feels. That's how it sounds. I get that a little bit. Again, I think his age makes this more confusing. I don't think it works contractually. I do believe in Kirk next year. If I had to pick, George, if we're doing an NFL preview show, I think the Falcons will win the South coming up next season. I think Kirk's going to throw 4K, and they're going to win the South. I believe in Kirk Cousins maybe more than most. So I do think that's odd in that respect. And what I would have done if I was the Falcons because of that, George, their help would have been on the defensive side of the ball. I would have traded back and got a defensive player. That's what they should have done. Correct. I would have traded back and got defensive players weren't taken forever. I would have traded back and got a defensive player, worried about the pass rush now, and then the rest later. But that's not what they did. And by the way, the only other draft thing that I do want to get to, do you have any issues with the Bills' strategy? Because they're the other kind of confusing team. I know they got a receiver early on in the 2nd round. They pulled that trigger right away in the 2nd round. They got their receiver. They claim he always was their guy, but they also traded with the team they never can get over the hump and beat in Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. The Chiefs, despite winning championships, the only guy they haven't been able to replace in the beginning of their dynasty was Tyreek Hill, and he was a burner and could take up the top off the defense with Patrick Mahomes. They now believe they have that guy in Xavier Worthy and his speed. If he gets his hands right, he could be a playmaker, especially with the best quarterback in the game. They would not have been able to get him if it was not for the Bills giving him basically to them. And even though the Bills get their receiver, they help the rival. So to me,
Yeah.
it seems a bit murky. It seems like it's going to be really risky. And it also seems like we're going to hear about for the next decade on how the Bills could have had Xavier Worthy, and yet the Chiefs do, and he's going to be a Pro Bowler next year.
Yeah.
With
And it's
Mahomes.
like very specifically Kansas City being the bugaboo there, where it's like, you know, okay, we're going to trade with New Orleans and out of conference team, whatever. New Orleans pops in there and they take Xavier Worthy. No, it's we trade with Kansas City, and Kansas City takes a position that we were going to take anyway. And oh, by the way, it's the guy that set he's the fastest human in the NFL ever. Setting the record
Right.
at the combine. So yeah, it doesn't make any sense what they did there. They got a lot of weird, they took so Keon Coleman. They traded out of the first round. So they didn't have any first round picks. Keon Coleman, Florida State, of course, had a great year last year. But we'll you hope the best for him and everything. But Worthy may be the more I would say is the more dynamic.
They're different receivers. Does he fit them more? That was kind of what they argued.
Yeah.
They're different guys. Like they wanted Coleman, which is why they're willing to trade out.
Speed. I'll take speed I can't teach speed. I don't care. I can teach technique to Keon Coleman, great, but I can't teach him to be fast. Like I have with Xavier Worthy and his teammate Adonai Mitchell, who also Texas teammate is also nearly as fast. They took Cole Bishop, who is a safety from Utah, Ray Davis, running back from Kentucky, in the fourth round. Like Davis, could be an unheralded gem, but they let so many of these guys go. Mike, they had Micah Hyde, Rasul Douglas, who they traded Rasul Douglas midseason. And they don't want to re-sign him, but we're going to draft a guy. So they've done a lot of kind of weird things here in the wake of losing again to the Chiefs.
And we talked about after they traded Stephon Diggs.
Yeah.
But I mean, that the whole point of doing that was, okay, there's drama there. He wants to go. We get it. But you got to replace him with a receiver early in this draft. You have to keep the window open. They do it in Coleman a little bit, but he's not the best receiver in the draft. Was he the best even available when you were picking? And you help your rival. I think it's as simple as that. It's not even as complex to debate it like the Falcons situation. They help their rival, the team they can't get over, and I don't believe they got the better of the receivers.
Exactly.
Like Coleman has to have a better career. This is unfair to him. But in the next 10 years, he has to literally have better stats, more Pro Bowls. They got to win more, or it's not a better pick because you now have two guys compared to each other on what he does versus Worthy. If Coleman goes out in the next 10 years, George, and has a really solid career, makes a few Pro Bowls, they go to the playoffs, he has a solid career. But Xavier Worthy becomes the next Tyreek Hill, everyone's going to say you could have had the Hall of Famer. Like they could have had Worthy, and they said no to help the rival who's going to continue their dynasty for this other guy who could still be good, but unfair to him. We're going to be looking at Coleman versus Worthy for another decade, the Bills versus the Chiefs for another decade. And George, if you got to bet your money, what are you betting on? Mahomes and the Chiefs and Worthy, or Allen, the Bills, and Coleman? I'm going Chiefs, Mahomes, and Worthy. Like they're going to get the most out of that guy, and they've been winning.
Yeah, it's not ragging on Coleman like he was and deservedly deserved to be a high second round pick. It just should not have been to Buffalo. It should have been to somebody else like Jacksonville.
It's also not even ragging on the Bills and Josh Allen too. The issue is the quarterback and the team that you're kind of like right underneath, despite you guys being great as well. You helped. If they would have done this with another team, it might not even be as bad.
And we have talked about this, and of course, some of this is obviously directly tied to how dominant Kansas City has been in that conference in the past 5 years. But we talked about this toward the tail end of last season, where if you're Buffalo, whatever you perceive to be a window or an opportunity now, it's fleeting. You're seeing the cracks in what it was. Josh Allen is no longer at the height of his powers. And that to me is I got to have dynamicism around him. I got to have playmakers. I got to have dynamic guys. And I think
they're not better there
for them.
Yeah, they're not better there without Stephon Diggs. They're younger there now. Maybe you can be a receiver and impact right away. Of course you can. But again, I just can't get over the fact that Coleman, here's the issue. If Coleman matches Stephon Diggs' production, great. Still, I can criticize it because he has to match Worthy's.
Yeah.
You could have had you traded out. I think the issue is not so much of what they did with Diggs, which is what we argued about a month ago. The issue is, which is why this is like unanimously criticized. They did not even trade. By the way, they passed on multiple receivers before Coleman, not even just Worthy.
Mm-hmm.
They had Leggett there as well.
Mm-hmm.
So there are now two receivers going to be compared to him for the next decade and what they do. And you figure that maybe Coleman is only going to really worry about Worthy. But again, they help the team they can't get over, and they were right there. It seemed easy. This is not a hard decision. A lot of draft decisions are hard. You're right there. Take Worthy, be done, and then say we want to go for the future. That's why we moved on from Diggs. Now we got more money. The only argument in favor of the Bills, which is what some Bills fans who really want to be glass half full will try to argue, George, is they did benefit by gaining draft picks by giving up Worthy. So they could say that they're not worried about the Chiefs. They want to make themselves better. They're worried about themselves now. And what they did was they got a receiver they like, but also got some draft picks they otherwise would not have had for the future. I would still argue, great, but your window is now with the All-Pro QB and the MVP candidate. And for next season on, you're going to be watching Xavier Worthy catch touchdown passes, take the top off the defense. He's going to do it against you, maybe in the playoffs again. Coleman could be great, especially with the offense they run with Allen. It feels like it's a unnecessary risk, and the fans are going to forever compare to what the Chiefs and Worthy do versus what Allen and Coleman do. And I don't even think that's a great situation for Coleman to be in. If I'm like Penix, we talked about, it's not even what these teams do. If I'm Penix, I'm pissed. I got to wait a couple years when I feel like I'm ready now. That's my real problem. And then if I'm Coleman, I'm kind of mad that I'm going to get compared to the fastest guy on the planet for the next 10 years when that's not fair to me. So we will see, but it feels like the Bills are worse off for their window than they would have been 2 months ago prior to the Diggs trade and prior to this draft.
The two picks immediately in front of them, Buffalo took Coleman with the first pick in the second round. The two picks immediately in front of them, as Mike mentioned, he mentioned Xavier Leggett, talented wide receiver from South Carolina, went to Carolina, and Ricky Pearsall from Florida went to San Francisco. So
okay,
those two
yeah.
guys
I mean,
between Worthy there. Buffalo, it basically was it was pick swaps. Buffalo traded.
But they didn't have enough picks later. Wasn't that part of it, though? That's the issue. They were trying to get other picks.
But Buffalo traded back to what would have been 32 in the first round, where Carolina took Leggett. They then traded that to Carolina for number 33 to move back a spot and 141. So just dual pick swaps left and right in this year's draft. Nothing, major tangential for the future. That they got out of doing that. So yeah. And very quickly, Mike, I'll throw in too as we transition off of football. In that group of teams, them along with Atlanta and Buffalo, Dallas, only for the fact that
they've been confusing for months, and I don't know what they're trying to do for now.
Only for the fact that it was confusing when Jerry Jones came out and said we're all in. Then you had if you are someone that consumes,
got to Zeke Elliott back, I guess. I mean,
if you're somebody who consumes the commentary shows of the morning, such as First Take and whatnot, should they pick Dak Prescott's successor selection, which they did not, and then here comes Zeke Elliott back. But then also after Jerry Jones saying we're all in, they go out, and again, no disrespect to these guys, but Tyler Guyton, their first round pick, late first round offensive tackle at Oklahoma. Marshawn Neeland, defensive end, Western Michigan, another offensive lineman from Kansas State, a linebacker from Notre Dame, cornerback, and it's just very like
George, and
not some owner kind of draft picks when they are all in,
right. Well, all in my ass with a comma, like to steal Skip Bayless's comment. All in my ass. That's what I would be asking if I was a Dallas Cowboys fan. The issue is, you have an 80-plus-year-old owner who he has tons of championships already and is already a Hall of Famer with wins and all of that and all the bling you want. But he has said publicly it's been a long time since that 95 Super Bowl. He wants another one. They haven't even been in the NFC title game since then. He wants a deep run. He wants to win big again. He believes he can do it now, even though obviously that's hypocritical based on how he's handling Dak's contract situation. But if you're 80 plus years old and you want to win another championship, you want to do it with this crew, and you want to do it now, because even though they've floundered in the playoffs, they have 3 straight 12-win seasons, George, with McCarthy. They didn't go get Belichick. They kept McCarthy. They've been a winning team. They are in win-now mode. And yet, the entire offseason, George, they've been acting like they're rebuilding. All it is we don't want to pay you. We're going to do this in the draft. We're going to get this young talent. We're doing this for the future. You're 82 years old. You want to win now, and you're worried about a quarterback contract and being in win now mode. Are you in win now mode, or are you rebuilding? That's why it's all in my ass. It feels like you're not all in. You're rebuilding, oddly, despite being 80 plus years old. So that's kind of the confusing thing. But there were other options of what they could have done. If they would have done this in the draft, and they maybe would have signed Derrick Henry to fix the running game to add a boost to that, okay. He claims they didn't even call him. He says that the first take and all these shows you're mentioning are lying, and they didn't even call the man.
Yeah. Saquon Barkley was available as well.
Sure, and obviously that took up a lot more to get, but I think Derrick Henry ended up being kind of cheap, and he's going to give him probably 900 yards in Baltimore. There were things they could have done, and they haven't hit big like that in a while. But if you're going to really be all in, then you need to act like you're all in. And the way they've been acting is why the Dallas Cowboy fans are asking all in my ass, with a big question mark at the end of that, and certainly a comma before ass. That is the issue in Dallas. But yeah, they've been losing the whole offseason. In terms of the draft, I think the Falcons and Bills maybe lost more, or at least were more confusing. But for the most part, a lot of these teams did well. This was not a draft with a lot of teams that did poorly. A lot of teams did well in this draft. You could argue Houston built again. If you like Daniels, then Washington probably had a solid draft. Green Bay probably had a solid draft, maybe.
No, a lot of teams addressed positions of need, and there wasn't anything that was overwhelmingly.
There's been another confusing team, I guess, out there after hiring Harbaugh. They've kind of been confusing. Allen goes, and then what are they really doing in terms? There've been a lot around the line, but do they need more talent and weapons for Herbert? Kind of almost is like Harbaugh's building Michigan, where he's like, okay, you're the QB. We're gonna do a lot on the ground, and then you just figure it out receiver wise. It almost feels, and Herbert's not it doesn't feel like he fits what Harbaugh's doing, even though he says he's going to make him better. So we'll see how that works.
Yeah,
it should be the great coach, a perfect coach for him, but it doesn't feel like he fits what Harbaugh is doing. But the Cowboys have been the biggest offseason loser, as these other teams are confusing in the draft. But we'll see.
We'll see. A lot of we'll see in there. Let's take a quick timeout. We will see how these playoffs will develop in the next few weeks in both the National Hockey League and National Basketball Association. We will break it all down next on the HBS. All right, keep it live there. I'm going to write that down. 57, 31. Let me hit the bathroom real quick.
Oh, okay.
All right. Welcome back inside the Howitzer and Buzzsaw show. George, the Howitzer Gerbo.
Mike, the Buzzsaw Asti.
Time to talk playoffs. Wonderful time of the year. We'll start.
Yeah, instead of building to try to get to the playoffs, actually playoffs are going on. In
actual
sports.
Things you're actually playing for, the right to advance and play in a championship. We will start and still a lot of things unsettled, of course, as is the situation this time of year. But let's start in the NBA, and we've got some opportunities, and that was kind of true before this whole playoff bracket came out. But now you're past the play-in, and we're past the first round in a couple of instances. Half the grid, basically, more so on the Western side, but you've got some opportunities for some things that we differently than we haven't seen in the NBA before. Of course, the defending champion Nuggets are still there, handling the Lakers in a gentleman's sweep 4-1. That was also the fate of the Heat, who played the Nuggets last year in the finals. They were once again a play-in team. Last year they went from play-in to the final. This year it's
didn't get playoff Jimmy is the problem.
Play in and out, and no playoff Jimmy, as they roundly defeated 30 plus, nearly 40 points by the Celtics in the first round. So the Celtics move on in 5. Oklahoma City sweep over another play-in team, the Pelicans, and we've also got Denver getting another team that swept Minnesota, who swept the Suns. And it's kind of where I want to start, because we've got a lot, and I'm going to tie this in between two things here, Mike. What the Suns are doing and what the Bucks are doing, where the full on breakdown of the Suns is happening in real time, and it's everything from
not if you ask their owner, they're fine. Did you hear that? They're not changing a damn thing according to what they're saying, which would obviously be okay. Well, just
shout out to HBS, but that seemed a little sus.
Yeah, they're fine.
For anybody, KD is his own thing. We talked a lot about KD on this program. I like Kevin Durant, but he's going to be maybe hunting for another team that he can rally 2 more people to his side to do something else.
And he's been miscalculated. I think is not debating his greatness as a player. It's hard for anyone to argue he's been great as an executive trying to get himself on rosters.
At his current attitude.
And the Suns thing, and following Kyrie, and then he became a little bit of a off his rocker and a lunatic during that COVID situation. That team, the Nets era, is probably the most underachieving big 3 ever. And then this Suns thing, and honestly, on the floor, because going back to what HBS said, we're going to unlock the best we've ever seen from KD. Well, it's hard to believe that he's won 2 Finals MVPs and been an MVP prior to even going to Golden State. I think that was the best of KD. You're not going to get more of that as he gets older. But the other issue is, you could argue this was KD's worst year in about 7 years.
Yes.
I mean, he became like a 3-point shooter on the wing. Like, that's not what he does. He never got to really take over any games. Their offense went through Booker, not him, even though you're arguing he's the best player. But they didn't do – if they're going to sit there and say they want to scheme this for KD, they did the opposite last year. They basically just told him to fit into whatever slop they're putting out there. And are they looking for a coach again? Because they brought in a coach in 1 year. They're likely done again with him after. It feels like, George, and I don't want to, jokingly, I'll call this the Gerbo curse, but they messed it up themselves, because ever since they've had a 2-0 series lead over Milwaukee in the COVID championship after the Lakers, but the other one that was truncated in that same calendar year.
Mm-hmm.
They've been making horrendous decisions and now appear way far from winning a championship. Like, and what Booker and KD are saying, we just need a facilitator. You had Chris Paul, one of the greatest facilitators of all time. Yeah. You ushered him out the door, and Bradley Beal never felt like he fit in. He couldn't stay healthy. They are light years for winning a championship, whether KD is there or not. They could have KD still there, and I don't think they're going anywhere.
Devin Booker has not matured, developed in terms of becoming the type of Jamal Murray-like player, perhaps to reference another younger guy that you would like to see out of him. And Bradley,
I think he's better than Jamal Murray. That's like a hot take a little bit.
No. Well, it's just, but like he should be developed. I would agree with you generally, but he
was the best player on a team that went to the finals.
Yes.
Murray's number 2. It's a little different.
Yeah. And
you could argue he's maybe regressed since then, but is that because he lost Chris Paul?
Very good point. Yeah, I would say he has regressed since then, but yes, that very well could be due to the compliment around him. Anybody who watched, this is going to be Bradley Beal slander time. Shout out to Showing Mad Love and B hyphen here. Anybody who's watched Bradley Beal in DC or watched him in DC, like it was a great little halcyon time we had in the early 2010s where him and John Wall arguably were the best backcourt in the NBA. And
then it was him with like the Globetrotters.
And then it was him and the Globetrotters and the Funky Bunch. Yeah. And it's no disrespect to Bradley Beal, who's mere point shy of being the highest scoring wizard in team history, and hinted that he might want to come back and do that. It's no disrespect to him, but like
you should let him get that. That is insane. He didn't get that.
If you were a Wizards fan, like the writing on the wall was here, like Bradley Beal was not going to be the dynamic transformational guy to come in. It worked in that weird, quirky environment with John in Washington.
But didn't the Suns give you with what you want? He was number 3. He's brought in to not be the number.
Oh, no, exactly. But it seems like a lot of people are saying that he should have been more of a factor in this season. He was oft injured. And
I think him being injured is the issue.
I think Bradley Beal has been perennially overrated in his career.
Well, I don't disagree, but I'm just saying
he played in Washington where there wasn't any stars really. Him and John were the stars.
Yeah. He's been overrated.
Value as a trade piece, and he's been overrated for most of his career. It's just.
However, I agree. However, I think it's a leap from saying he's overrated to say that he cannot be the 3rd best player on a good team. He's number 3. He's not. If the Suns brought him in, I'll agree with you. If the Suns did not have KD and they brought him in to be Booker's number 2 without KD, I would be nervous.
Sure.
If he was there with KD and no Booker in the future, I would be nervous because there's rumors there. But if you're saying he's a number 3 guy, that is where I'm like, okay, he shouldn't have been never the number 1 on a good team. Sure. I agree but if you're good enough to not be the number 1, even though we agree he's good, but he's overrated, you should fall back at being a number 3.
Sure.
Like that's a leap to say he can't even be part of this. I think the issue is he doesn't fit. It's not an indictment of him.
He doesn't.
If he's going to be the number 3, like the number 3s in memory, Chris Bosh, Ray Allen, etc. They had different roles than their like Kevin Garnett and Ray Allen. That's kind of a big forward versus a shooter. They're 2 different guys. The Suns, even Chris Bosh, he was a different type of guy than LeBron or D Wade. All 3 different guys. They eventually fit. The issue here with the Suns, basically, I'll make it this simple. Devin Booker is a poor man's Kevin Durant, and Bradley Beal is a poor man's Devin Booker. They're all 3 the same freaking player. And
you're right about the not fit. He can be be number 3, but I need him to be better than league average as a number 3 on a team, and he is not in this situation. Would he maybe in another situation?
I think he could be in another situation is what I think you're not being fair.
But yeah,
I just don't think this is
100% that it doesn't make any sense there in Phoenix. Let me tie that into a team you just mentioned who's got some similar funky issues, and that's Milwaukee. Who
they at least did win the title because that's the only thing they got going.
Yeah, they at least did win the title. Shout out to Mike Budenholzer. Your ass is gone. Here's Adrian Griffin. Shout out to Adrian Griffin. Your ass is gone. Nary 20 games into the season or whatever it was this year. Guess who we're going to find? Oh, it's Doc Rivers, who did all of 3 weeks of commentating games on ESPN. Did a great job. Doc Rivers was very good on.
No, he was good. It was raspy voice and a little coup d'etat, and he's in there as a coach. But I think, George, to your chagrin and to my chagrin as well,
Giannis is injured. We'll mention that too.
But there it is. Giannis is injured. They've held out Dame because they realize they're not going to beat this funky Pacers team. I think the issue is for the Bucks will be back-to-back early round exits. They did win the title, so they at least have that, but there's pressure to do it again now with Dame. You don't bring in Dame not to win again. You're not bringing in Dame to lose in the first round. George, here's what's funny. Dame could have done this in Portland. having no chance to go anywhere, having no chance to make a run. They could do this in Portland. He might as well stayed there and get a statue than to go ahead and go.
He looks around. He looks at Chris Middleton, and he kind of sees a silhouette of CJ McCollum, and he's like this. Well, damn, here I am again.
Losing in a gentleman's sweep early on in the playoffs is what he did in Portland all those years, except for the one. So the issue, though, for the Bucks is, I do feel like, unlike the Suns, who brought in Beal, you have KD for a full season, you're rear and ready to go. tons of pressure. You were in the finals. You didn't win the ring. You do cast off Chris Paul. George, this isn't making this up. Chris Paul goes on Good Morning America and says they handled me poorly. I'm pissed off. They texted me in the plane. I didn't want to leave. All that. So they piss him off. Like they're not bringing him back for a ceremony next year. He's mad at them. He was on podcast talking about it. So
as part of a coincidentally timed book tour.
Yeah, like talking about handling things poorly with mismanagement to Kirk Cousins and texting him the day of the pick. I don't get how these teams are just poor at managing people. None of them can manage people. They have
Washington with it for a hot second. What a time! What a time!
So he was. So you piss off the guy that helped you get to the finals. You don't win. You blow that series. You have a full year of KD. You bring in Beal. They had pressure. They had arguably more pressure on them to win right now than the Bucks. And the reason why I say that, and even they're worse off for the future,
everything was in front of them to be a dominant team in the West for like 5 years.
Sure, but I also think the other issue, George, and this is how the Buck kind of set themselves up for this, and this is what Doc Rivers does best, is he's Mr. Overrated Coach and Mr. Excuse King. You know what's going on now? They are able to go one more year of this BS, because what they're going to do in the offseason is say, we only had Doc half a year. Once we got Doc in, Budenholzer and the prior, they all had Giannis healthy. Giannis hasn't been healthy for Doc. Dame hasn't been healthy for Doc. Giannis missed this series. Dame missed games in this series. So what I think they're going to be able to sell in the offseason is we need a full season of Doc's BS with Giannis healthy and Dame healthy. Like Giannis was hurt. You just said it. You a little throwaway comment on the open. Giannis is hurt.
Season of Doc, so we can go 7 games with the Pacers and then lose.
Well, to be fair, George, ever since they won a title, and this is going to be the Sixers thing too, they could argue that Giannis hasn't been healthy in the playoffs since then.
Yeah.
Giannis was hurt last year. Giannis is hurt again. They bring in Dame. Dame is not healthy here. Doc, again, I do think it was crappy to kind of what Doc did. He was mentoring a guy and then he took his job. I don't think you needed Doc. I think Doc's been overrated. If you going from the mid 2000s and the 10s, the Celtics big three were great with him. But after that, it's been a myriad of disappointments and Game 7 losses. But have we been fair to grade this Bucks team? Because it's not like the Suns have had Booker and KD hurt. They just haven't been good. The Bucks have had everyone hurt. So that's why we could maybe keep on going with this next year. Now, are they going to be better next year together? I don't know, but they didn't get the crew. Like Giannis was out and then they held Dame out a game. If you don't have Dame and Giannis both, like what are you doing?
So looking to his right, and it's like, man, this is like me and CJ all over again.
I mean, he was so worried about leaving Portland, and then he's losing the first round. Like I don't think anyone thought that situation, but they could go ahead and be much better next year. Again, I think Doc's overrated as a coach historically, but
I'll give Indiana
off next year.
I'll give Indiana some slight credit too, that they have now found the version of themselves that was the in-season tournament finalist version of themselves. After they went kind of wayward there, in the lead up around the All-Star break, which was also in Indy this year. They seem to be playing the basketball at the beginning of the season that got them to the finals, IST and whatever. Sixers. Sixers Knicks is just like wild to watch on a nightly basis.
It's fun. It's the most controversial. Two of the games go down the last second, and they're very controversial with Maxey's game winner, and then the no call.
Sixers blew a game in the final minute that they should have won. The Knicks blew a game in the final 90 seconds that they should have won.
Embiid drops 50, then he gives you nothing. Maxey steps up and kind of emerges to what Harden should have been last year.
Nick Batum gave you 40 in a game. Like it's just, we're running wild all over the place here. The funnier result is the Knicks losing. I actually kind of want to see the Knicks win just to see them in a second round series for what feels like the first time since we were children. Honestly,
they haven't clinched a series at home in 25 years.
And
the last time the Knicks won a series was literally, the Carmelo year when they won the division with Carmelo.
And with all due respect to the Bucks, add in the specter of them playing the Pacers in games that would be on TNT. Reggie Miller on the call on the commentary. Come on, it's
also why many are saying that the winner of this Knicks Sixers thing almost can walk to the Eastern Conference Finals. A little some disrespect there in the middle, because the way this format works is, unlike you could argue in the West, where you're going to have probably maybe your toughest matchup in the second round. Like I think the second best team in the West is the Timberwolves, and that's who the Nuggets are going to see. But over in the East, these teams are kind of going to be able to, walk past the second round onward, which is what like Boston
Boston
Cleveland
even on more of a fast track. If you take Cleveland or Orlando in that series, like the Cavaliers always
Donovan Mitchell would have to score 60 every game.
Cavaliers are super young. Garland, everybody, they always seem kind of fraudulent. They were hovering around the top 3 the whole season, and it's great, but they really weren't dynamic in any way or like world beaters. And if Boston doesn't get by them in less than 6 games, I would be surprised. So yeah, could you have Knicks? Is Knicks Celtics more fun in the conference finals? Sure. But yeah, if you're a Knicks fan, you're not checking the boxes on anything, especially with the way they played in this last game against the Sixers. So we'll see how that all pans out.
And the sad thing is, I think the team that could threaten the Celtics the most, and even without Porzingis, the Celtics are going to walk to the NBA Finals. They have problems in the NBA Finals without him because of the size, but they should still walk through the East. But the team that could actually, I honestly think, could give the Celtics the most problems are the team that's having an issue in the first round with the Knicks because they can't get Embiid healthy and all of this. The 76ers seem like they're the second best roster with Embiid as a former MVP and then Maxey now emerging as a star. The Sixers versus the Celtics in a hypothetical series that we're likely not going to see, that would probably be the top 2 teams in the conference. The Sixers were only a 7 seed because Embiid was hurt half the year. They would have been a higher seed if he was healthy. So I get the Knicks maybe have the depth, but it's interesting to me that I do believe in the Sixers having more of a chance against Boston than even the Knicks would, but they're likely having this Knicks problem and not going to get out of this Knicks series. And then we were talking about the Bucks and Suns, about the future of these franchises, George. Embiid could leave, and then the Sixers' whole process is totally in the can. And as much as Maxey's emerging, that franchise went from thinking they had a chance and knocking on a door to they're pretty far out of there. So who knows where they're going to be. That shot Kawhi Leonard hit when they should have went to the conference finals a few years ago seems to be the closest they're going to get to conference finals in a while, especially if Embiid is not there. So that looks like an opportunity squandered. But the Knicks are very, very interesting. And the Knicks also, get them on TV, George, every time they're on there, they bring
entertainment.
Anyone who's a Knicks fan, they literally pay the way to go to the game. Like, first of all, Carmelo and Kid Mero at every fucking game.
A lot of people they're calling celebrities out there that I'm like,
yeah, but I mean, if you look
at those 2 guys, but like there were some other people like, oh look, so and so's here, and I was like, I don't care that they're here. Sure,
but if you go to their Instagram after games, they got a whole Rolodex of everybody and their brother that they have, like they were at the game. It's almost like they care about who was at the game as much as winning the game. So they have a whole celebrity. Spike Lee, of course. I'm sure he'll go to all the games against the Pacers. That'll be something. Miller. But so Tracy like
Morgan,
I believe Emma Stone, they think, is now a Knicks fan. Like, they do kind of stretch it on who's a Knicks fan. But if you're in New York and you potentially
not be a fan, but legitimate celebrity,
like if you're in New York and you are a celebrity, even if you're a D-lister, you're there, you're on IG, and they'll put the camera on you. And that's part of it too. So you get the pageantry of that by having the Knicks finally good here. And if you can't have LeBron, Steph, KD, the Lakers, having the Knicks relevant. I mean, obviously they haven't won a championship since '73. They haven't really been that close since the '90s and even that Melo year. This is the time for the Knicks. Could be the best Knicks era in a while in the next several years. They're very young. They have several stars there. We'll see what they do. But it feels like the Celtics are walking and then through the East. And then I will say out West, it feels like the Nuggets are going to walk back to the finals as well, because even though they swept the Lakers, he didn't even get the best of the Nuggets, or they won in 5, but it really was a gentleman's sweep. And they didn't really give you the best to the Lakers either. They can give more with the Joker and Murray and company, although they're not as deep as last year. And I do believe that the only team that can derail the Nuggets, I don't believe in whether it be the Clippers or Kawhi never plays and the Mavs or whatever else happens in the West. The team that can give the Nuggets the most problem, I do believe, is Minnesota with Ant and with Karl Anthony Towns. They get a 2-headed monster there, and they are deep and they are really good and they're really hungry. If you would put that roster on any other franchise, people would be picking them to come out of the West. But because it's the Timberwolves and they haven't been good since the early 2000s, people think, oh, they can't do it. That is a good group and a good team. They could even knock off Denver, and if they do, maybe they come out of the West. But that's it. That's kind of the only thing that stops it. So we could have Denver, Boston, if I had to bet right now, and then we'll see what happens in that finals. And the pressure's on WVU grad and Joe Mazzulla to actually lift the trophy, because going to the finals wouldn't be enough there for that franchise. But they got to come out of the East, and Denver still feels like a big favorite right now. to come out of the West. I mean, I say Minnesota is the next threat, and that's a matchup for them. And they're a sexy pick. Not everyone's going that way, but I do believe in Minnesota. Is there another team in there that would threaten Denver besides Minnesota?
No, again.
I mean, do you believe in Dallas? Because it looks like now they're going to move on if Kawhi still stays not playing and they beat up the Clippers a lot recently.
Yeah, the Clippers are kind of a tough out, obviously, but I don't believe
not without
Dallas.
Kawhi.
I mean,
he didn't play the last game.
I know, but still, there's if Dallas is as dominant as I think most people think they should be, this should have been an easier road for them to hoe against the Clippers, who are merely a collection of superstars past their prime.
Sure, especially without Kawhi. I mean, they shouldn't be struggling ever in a series without Kawhi. Paul George missing time. Yeah, I get that. Yeah,
my favorite recent stat. Shout out to Russ. He's 4 of 32 in games. 4 of 32 shooting in games 2 through 5 in this series.
I think even him and Paul George combined for like 8 of 30 something. Like it's really bad. And Paul George in the past has been able to actually carry them through series. If you remember when Kawhi missed against Phoenix, Paul George by himself made that respectable and went 6 games and almost 7. That's not the Paul George we're seeing now.
No. Again,
it feels like he's regressed.
They were all great players and league superstars in the latter part of the last decade, mid to late part of the 2010s, and we are past that now. It's just how it goes.
I mean, it's not like they're 40 years old. They should be better than this.
They should be better. They should be better than this, but also they're old. You know?
I mean, you're making it sound like they've been in the league 25 years. I mean, this is LeBron.
Like Father Mike Asti quote, "Father Time is undefeated." You know.
Yeah, I mean, Father Time is very much undefeated, and I'd like to see Minnesota do this and knock off Denver and advance. We'll see. I don't know if I'm picking it, but that would be interesting to me. That would be fun. Maybe this would open up the door for kind of that fun. Obviously, Golden State's way out of there. The Lakers were out of there. Like, let's let a whole new cast of characters and a whole new blood in there. But it does feel like we're headed for Denver, Boston again. It's hard to believe Denver wouldn't win that. But if Porzingis gets healthy and they get the size, Boston's loaded with Brown, with Tatum, Derek White scoring 38 points the other night. Drew Holiday has a championship experience from the previously mentioned Bucks that he actually is producing a lot defensively and even had 12 points a game offensively this past year. So they are more loaded than they even were the last couple years when they knocked on the door and just couldn't get it done. Maybe they can beat Denver. Maybe they beat Denver. Maybe Denver gets back but doesn't win. I don't know. I mean, we have different teams here. We have some stars and dynasties not rolling anymore, but it feels like we're still kind of on a collision course for two teams to meet in the NBA Finals. But I would not count out Minnesota. I'm high on the Timberwolves.
I like the strength.
I'm high on the Timberwolves right now.
High on the Timberwolves. Is there a collision? Is there a similar collision course for the Stanley Cup Final in the National Hockey League? Yes and no. Florida appears to be as dominant as they were, and perhaps even better than they were last season when they made it all the way to, as the final entrant into the playoffs, all the way to the Stanley Cup Final, eventually losing to the Vegas Golden Knights. The New York Rangers, President's Trophy winners this year, also appear to be similarly dominant. They will take on the Carolina Hurricanes in the second round. Carolina, who going into this playoff had the best odds at about approximately plus 550 to win the Stanley Cup. Kind of surprising to some folks. They will take on the Rangers. Combined, the two teams only lost one game. The Hurricanes lost to the Islanders. Rangers swept the Capitals. Florida advances, moves on. Boston, Toronto still undecided. And then out west, you've got Colorado, who looks every bit as good as they were when they won the Stanley Cup a few years ago.
Right, and no one's talking about them. But
no one's really talking about them. A lot of people, Winnipeg had the home ice advantage there in that divisional matchup in the first round. Some people, Thatcher Demko probably will win the Vezina Trophy, best goaltender, but I wasn't that high on the Jets, and
I never am in the playoffs, so I was high on the Jets.
Like, it was like, Winnipeg has a chance to make a run. I'm like, do they? It's like they're playing Colorado in the first round. If they were playing the Kings in the first round, sure, but no. Instead, Colorado gets in and gets past Winnipeg relatively easily in a 4-1 win in that series. We mentioned at the top of the show, the Dallas-Vegas series is the most intriguing, sans Boston-Toronto, which is intriguing for its own reasons. There, William Nylander missed time.
Yeah, it's the same series every year, though. Just watch Boston-Toronto from last year.
It really is the same series every year. The Toronto people think it's their time, and then Boston pulls back. Toronto has not beaten Boston in a playoff series in more than half a century.
Yeah, 6 or 7 games every time, and they always give you like they're going to come back from 3-2, and they maybe do it, and then they lose in disappointing game 7. It's the same death taxes in this damn thing.
So that's why the Dallas-Vegas one is a little more interesting in terms of Vegas took the upper hand, but Dallas has stormed back now. Can Vegas answer? And then you've got Edmonton, who's into the second round, and will get either Vancouver or Nashville. And does this present it, which is the question I'll pose to you, Mike, besides those dominant teams we talked about in the Eastern half there, and potentially who Edmonton could meet in a Western Conference final. But does this present itself as Connor McDavid's best opportunity with this team he has, with how dominant he's been this season, even missing 10 games due to injury, and still nearly coming back at the end and taking the Hart Trophy race, finished third. But does this present his best opportunity to reach, let alone win, but we'll say reach for sake of argument, the Stanley Cup Final for the first time in his career?
This is clearly Connor McDavid's best opportunity because it's the best Oilers team he's had in a while, even the conference finals team. This is the team that performed. They had that win streak, flirting with the Penguins record. They have performed the best over the long haul, certainly when fully healthy. And yeah, he had some injury spurts in there, but still had a dominant season. And he's been at his best. There's never really been any drop-off from Connor McDavid throughout all of these years with the Oilers in the playoffs. But in past years, even when he finally got a partner and Draisaitl and others would be there, he had goaltending issues. Things like that feel like maybe they're getting a little bit corrected, although it could just eventually still be their Achilles heel. Defensively, they're better than they would have been in the past. They perform better in the first round. This is unlike past years, George. If you recall, even the year they went to the conference finals, the Oilers and McDavid would kind of do a similar thing that the Capitals used to do with Ovechkin before they won the Cup, where a lot of people would say, you're toiling with teams in the first round. You go through these 7-game series with the Rangers. That's why you're exhausted before the Penguins series, and then you lose that tough series. Once they started taking care of business, they then eventually broke through. The Oilers did that for a while. They would toy with the Kings or whoever they would meet in that first round. Sometimes they would get upset, but if they would win, it would be 7-game series. They'd have to win games 6-5. McDavid would have to have a hat trick and 4 overall points. They'd have no defense. Goaltending would be suspect. They would maybe get through, but it would be a real dogfight. This year, quick work. No, we're better. We're the best. We're going to do it. This is our year. We're not playing for 3.5 weeks and doing 7 games and you maybe beat us and we got to score 7 goals a game to do this. No, quick work. They get it done. They advance. And that showed me something that I haven't seen from the Oilers even in past years when they would go far. So this is by far McDavid's best year. George, when you're bringing up Nashville and Vancouver, I know as well as anybody, you cannot dismiss any team in the Stanley Cup playoffs. Anybody can beat anybody. But that's a pretty easy path. Like that's cakewalking you through at minimum of conference finals. If the Oilers lose to Nashville or Vancouver or any teams like that, that is a major upset when you have the best player in that series, bar none, the only one who's going to Hall of Fame, and likely the second and third best player in those series. So they should get out of that series relatively quick as well. And then you're only, 1 round away. So this is their best chance. Doesn't mean they're lifting the cup. I don't know. I can't guarantee that. I do think the Rangers, maybe even Carolina, even Florida again, who was pesky last year and surprised, but this year people realize how good they are and how great that franchise is even for the future. So the East maybe wins the cup this year. The East feels like it has more teams that could win it this year than maybe the West, where some teams underachieved, like, say, Colorado, who could still do it, or even Vegas and people picking Dallas. But I don't know about them. They kind of had a tougher road early in these playoffs than I would have thought from a team that was going to go the distance. So by far, this is an open path for the Oilers with the best player that's left in these playoffs, in the West at least. Does it mean they'll do it? No. Dallas could still. Other teams could still. But I do think Edmonton has this chance to make this the year for them. And then the East will be a whole nother problem. But if they never get to a final with McDavid, or McDavid never wins a cup, whether it be Edmonton or elsewhere, things like that. I think they'll look back and regret this postseason if they do not at least get to a cup final and at minimum a conference final, or it really will be really disappointing.
It seems to be set in front of them. You could take.
They look like they're better than they've been in past playoffs here, though. I mean, they dominated to this point.
Yeah, no fall off from Draisaitl. Two of the best playoff points scorers per game in the history of the league. I saw that stat yesterday behind Gretzky and Lemieux.
Oh, him and McDavid are right up there.
Yeah.
I mean, George, in all of the cups that Crosby won, and I'm not throwing shade at Crosby, but all the cups Crosby won, Crosby never had a single postseason with as many points as McDavid has put up.
Mm-hmm.
And McDavid's not been in a cup final, as you alluded to. So we're talking about Crosby having a whole nother round and McDavid putting up more points in a 3 rounds than Crosby put up in 4 rounds through multiple cup championship years. That tells me that McDavid is doing his part. That's why I push back at people that say McDavid has to do this and all, like the pressure's on him.
Done just about everything you've asked him.
I don't know what to do. That's that he's scoring more goals and getting more points in single playoffs through 3 rounds than Crosby's doing it through 4 rounds. Crosby had great teams around him that certainly helped, but what else do you need out of McDavid? Draisaitl doing the same thing. You have the top 2 playoff point per game performers in history right up there in McDavid and Draisaitl. And you got to at least get to a cup final. If not the Oilers, then who would be my question out west?
I liked Colorado I don't think Dallas has I don't want to hate to say experience, but just like I think Colorado is more built for the long run. But man, we know this time of year that it is who you have between the pipes, and Jake Ottinger has been on a tear this late part here in the season. And is probably the sole reason that Dallas still finds himself not only in the series, but leading the series after
Dallas has done this before, George. I think the Stars might be the most underrated sports franchise in North America. Yeah. I mean, they everyone always says it's, well, it can't be the Stars. They don't believe in them. And it's like, well, they've been in the finals a bunch of times. Like they could do this. I mean, it's been a while since they lifted the cup, but they usually go on deep runs.
Yeah.
I don't believe I'm not betting on the Stars either, but there's a reason why we've been wrong before on them.
That's true. It'll be fun to watch if Vancouver gets through to see, those 2 Western Canada teams battle it out. But Vancouver seems to have lost some of the punch that they had from the early and mid-season when they were the best team in the league. You never count them out with the talent that they have there, but it seems like that they crescendoed a little bit for them. I'd really like to see Colorado and Edmonton in the conference final. That's
again.
Well, I know, but like I hate people don't like it's the net. If we love the Ovechkin Crosby thing, and I'm not putting these guys on that pedestal yet, but man, if McKinnon and Connor McDavid aren't the next iteration of that in this league that the league can actually showcase because the ratings are up and it's on networks and it's being talked about by personalities on said networks. If we can't have that as our showcase and have people tune into that, even in a conference final, that seems like
we are. I think the odd thing about that is the guy that has the cup in McKinnon is the guy that's talked about less. And I'd be interested to know from the casual fan. I guess we're not the people to ask this, but I don't think if you're saying is McKinnon and McDavid in the same conference, maybe they're going to trade off final appearances, championships, etc., deep runs. Are they the new Crosby and Ovechkin who combined for 4 cups over a period and they played each other so often to get there? That would be great. I would love it. But I don't think the casual fan knew Ovechkin and Crosby even if they knew no other hockey player.
Yeah.
The casual fan, I do not know if they know McKinnon is as good as he's been. Yeah. They probably know McDavid, but you're talking about Edmonton. I don't know if that'll be marketed that way or that'll be that because I don't know if they're as marketed. But regardless, it'll be cool. I secretly don't know if I kind of want Colorado knocked off because I kind of want McDavid to do this. You're giving me a path that's McDavid that's like grueling for this man. I'd like McDavid just walk through.
I'm looking for. I think Stars Edmonton is less sexy in terms of overall.
Care. I want McDavid to walk in.
You want McDavid to walk in.
I'm sick of people doubting McDavid. I need him to walk through. Just let him walk through. And I would much rather have a conversation of, it was the easiest path ever. Okay, we'll have that be at the parade. We can talk about it there. I'd much rather be the case than
for the people that like the competitive and the brutal playoff. I'm giving you a potential Edmonton Colorado matchup as in the whole thing, the most sexy remaining matchup, regardless of what happens in the East. Because, again, we're hockey fans. We follow this stuff. What Florida's doing is really amazing. If it's Florida, Carolina, doesn't have much to it. If the Rangers get there with the chance to be in the Cup final for the first time in 30 years, that's got a little more punch to it.
Yeah, I don't think people should be doubting Carolina again. Nobody ever bets on them. But again, Carolina, they loaded up with
sexy. They're loaded. Not sexy, but they're loaded up. Yeah, we shout out to Raleigh. But I think Edmonton and Colorado would be the best remaining series of any kind in the rest of the playoffs if that were to happen. So
if that's the West, though, as we round out the show, and you sound like you're doubting Carolina, even though they loaded up. You're doubting Florida could do it again, because I've even said this to a friend of ours that I think last year was Florida's year. They maxed out there. I don't know if they're going to do it again, but if that's the belief, and we also can talk about how Boston and Toronto just beat everybody up, beat each other up. But do you really believe in either one of them, regardless of that series? Feels like Boston kind of missed their boat last year. Maybe they're at the end of their window. Toronto feels like they're just Toronto, and they're lucky to even get out of the first round. Are the Rangers walking to the Cup final? Then it almost sounds like you're giving me the Rangers walking through.
I like Florida a lot, because I think
it didn't sound like you did. Okay, you like
no, Florida. I think you've seen a continued maturation there. Hey, we're President's Trophy winners, but we flame out in the first round to our nemesis Tampa. Hey, we finally shake the Tampa thing. We run into the upstart, and they're a little bit upstart, and they get in, as the 8th seed, the last seed in the playoffs, either conference last year, and make a miraculous run. Now it's like, hey, we're established. We're not President's Trophy winners, but we're here. We're still as dominant. Chucky is Matthew Tkachuk is healed as he's going to be from all of his. Is
he a good friend of yours, Chucky?
Much content there, Chicklets and McAfee calling him Chucky. He's healed up from his 85 maladies that he had last year, including a broken sternum and 15 other injuries. So
I hear it. Yeah, he wasn't even healthy last year. That's what he says.
Maurice,
he wasn't healthy.
Veteran coach who seems to be pushing the right buttons with that, and a rejuvenated. Last year, remember, it was different guys, Alex Lyon and whoever else.
I know.
It is Sergei Bobrovsky returning to the Sergei Bobrovsky we remember from old.
Yeah.
In many ways, that has been the difference for this team. So no, my ideal matchup on the East side is Florida and the Rangers. I want to see that. Shout out to our friend Alex Wiederspiel. Like I have no quarrel with the Rangers.
He's scared of Florida, by the way. He is scared of Florida.
As he should be. I'd like to see the Rangers back in a position where they are competing for the chance to go to the Stanley Cup Final for the first time in 30 years. It's original 6 franchise. It's New York. If we drag that market in, how buku would that be?
Yeah. They were in the final before that, by the way.
For the sorry, chance for the first Stanley. I keep saying wrong. Chance for their first Stanley Cup win in 30 years.
Sure.
It feels like they haven't been in the Cup Final in 30
years.
It
does. The reason why I butted in, because that you always forget that.
I do forget. Was it 2016, 15? When was it?
Lundqvist went the year they lost the Kings.
Yeah. 13, 12 or 13?
It's 12.
12. Yep.
The year they lost the Kings is the Kings' first one, I believe.
Yeah.
But I've even heard you in other places and on this. Like you just like it's in your brain. Lundqvist did not go to the final.
I've erased that. Yeah, I've erased that.
But I mean, like that was a big deal. Like that was breaking the curse. That's what I'm saying. Like if you're going to shout out Alex and then say they haven't been,
my apologies.
They were
Alex,
there.
Alex, that 2012 season was garbage. The Kings were a team of destiny.
They were there.
All those,
but
and all those dudes. Yeah,
they were there. But yes, it would be the first time they won since '94, and then even before '94, they hadn't won since 1940. So I mean, for such an original 6 or
few and far between. Yeah,
it's been few and far between in terms of championships, especially in New York. And obviously, George, that would be very, very celebrated if they would win. It was 2014. I'm sorry, actually, it was 2014 was the year they lost to the Kings. Okay. But yeah, they did get there with Lundqvist, or at least Lundqvist got there once. It feels like obviously Edmonton has the most pressure because Colorado's already done it once, and Dallas has at least been there, and they're kind of under the radar. Edmonton has the most pressure to do this in the West with McDavid, maybe an easier path than in past years. The Rangers have more pressure than Florida does. Florida never has pressure. They have more pressure than Carolina. They've won as a franchise in this century, and they also never have pressure. The Rangers are New York, George. They have pressure, and they didn't win one for Lundqvist. They now have another goalie to take up that that mantle. They did. We were even telling Alex, like, you're going to take 5 years and have this dip, and without Lundqvist, it's going to be bad. It wasn't. They've been good. They're right back as a contender a few years after Lundqvist, but now they have pressure to finally get it done and lift that trophy to at least get to a cup final with this group. So they have the pressure out of the East. It's hard for me to want to pick them, though. It's almost like I don't want to go there. I don't think they're going to do it. That's why Florida, Carolina, like I almost believe in either one of them more. But I would, if you get what I want Rangers Oilers. I want Rangers Oilers.
I think that would be, yeah.
That's what I want. You can have Gretzky drop the puck, like Gretzky and Messier can be there. I want Rangers Oilers, and that would, I think, be the savior for the league. That if you're going to have McDavid in Edmonton versus being in a more of a marquee media market, you're going to at least have McDavid as a future Hall of Fame face of the league versus Original Six New York. Like, you would get the casual fan in. Stephen A. Smith would go to a game. You'd have McDavid there. That, I think, would be the best case scenario for the league for the future, to be honest. I think getting McDavid off the snide and getting New York in there would be fantastic for the league. Will it happen? I don't know. But, George, Colorado versus Florida, it doesn't get it done. McKinnon's great. Colorado's won a cup recently. They got off their 20-year drought. Sure, fantastic. That's Edmonton, New York would be the darling matchup for the league. There's a chance of it happening. I want it to happen, but we'll see. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to bet on the Rangers, and maybe it's not conventional wisdom because they looked really good, but that Capitals team probably would have lost anybody too. When you think about it, they just really weren't that great, even though they did get in and they deserved that opportunity.
Last and worst team in the playoffs for a reason. Deserved it. Then they won their games at the end like they needed to. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I will say the Red Wings and Penguins fans on Twitter are like, we would have done better than you. Like, I actually agree, by the way. I think the Penguins with Crosby and even Detroit with how well they played and how fast they are, I think they both would have had a better matchup. You know why they didn't get to show you? It's their own fault. So the Capitals got in. Yeah, they weren't going to go anywhere, but they deserved to be there. And then probably 2 years from now, but maybe next year Ovechkin will turn it on and be healthier and maybe then get Gretzky's record, but it's coming. And I already told somebody else, George, you need to put this out there in the ether in that area.
Okay.
I need that, like, really celebrated, like, highly. I'm not even talking about, like,
if he breaks the record.
Yeah. Like high level, like I mean like more than even what they did back in the day for the Redskins winning a Super Bowl or for the Nationals. I need this to be, here's why. I need that to be celebrated to what Barry Bonds would have been if it wasn't for the steroid cloud. Like when he broke Hank Aaron, that's a hallowed record, but it was just like the league wouldn't even celebrate it because the cloud over Bonds. There's none of that on Ovechkin. I need this really celebrated. I need this really celebrated to a high level. High level. Multiple parades. I need non-hockey fans to be aware of this. I need way long of a post-game show that's longer than normal. I need someone to cry. I mean, we're going to need a lot of things I need to have happen.
The Capitals are doing a great job of that. And to both their credit and also detriment, it's really the only thing that's driving the franchise at this point.
Oh, sure. Yeah. But at this point, you're dug in. Just get it done.
They're dug in, and it's just like, we're embracing this and we're going to do it. Yeah. But you say what you want about him nationally, but even in the city, like criminally underrated. My friend posited.
Nobody should be debating on whether Bradley Beal's their favorite player. Like, you got Ovechkin there. Like,
my friend Alex, who works here locally as a sports anchor on one of the TV stations, posited, and I agree with him. Alex Ovechkin, best athlete in the city's history. And then a whole bunch of other people were like, "Oh, what about Darryl Green?" And I'm like, God.
I mean, that's the thing. Like, that people love the football.
They love the freaking football and everything.
And they won 3 titles. Like, it is hard to argue that. But when they won those titles, they had a myriad of QBs. Right.
Yeah. Alex Ovechkin, world champion, Stanley Cup champion, the first one in the history of the franchise that was essentially irrelevant before the 1990s, even though it existed for 30 years prior to that. No, give him all the flowers that he's earned. Like, he's one of the greatest hockey players in history. Nobody that's ever played, nobody that's ever played, very few that have ever played on any of the other teams in this city have been can be considered the upper echelon greatest. Walter Johnson with the Senators years, again, nearly a century ago comes to mind. Maybe Sam Huff, maybe Sonny Jurgensen, but those
And you're also talking about literally DC. You're not talking about the region.
Correct. Yeah.
No, because if you go to the region, then it's over. You can go Cal Ripken, Ray Lewis.
No. We're leaving. Baltimore's not in this conversation. This is the Washington conversation. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Washington professional sports team conversation. Any of those, all those, there are guys from those Redskin teams who played and won Super Bowls that are in the Hall of Fame, but none of them were like transformative generational talents at their position. Alex Ovechkin, transformative generational talent who led the Capitals to their first Stanley Cup win. And part of that's quarterback, because you had a different quarterback all three times. That's
Washington what I'm saying. Yeah, different QB. If you had the same QB, I could see, like, if you had a Troy Aikman situation where it was the same QB for 3 rings, it would be hard to budge.
And like people, even this weird kind of season that Ovechkin had, where it was like a little burst at the beginning and then fell off for essentially 4 months and then burst here at the end. Nobody has scored goals at the rate he has scored goals at this age in their career.
Well, and also he had a dead puck era at the beginning of his career.
Yes.
Gretzky had wide open nets all the way through.
Gretzky and Gordie Howe. Yes. Both. Yeah.
Yeah. And obviously, even with this record that Ovechkin's going to break, I mean, Gretzky has more assists than Hall of Famers have points. It doesn't take away from Gretzky's greatness. But at the end of the day, it was harder for Ovechkin. At the beginning of his career, the commentary was, well, he's going to score a lot of goals, but he's never going to touch Gretzky because nobody can score that many goals in this dead puck era where it was so hard to score in the first 7-8 years of his career. It opened up since. But George, nobody was scoring 70, 80, 90 goals a season like they were back in the 80s and 90s. Mm-hmm. Brett Hull was a 70-goal season. Yzerman, Lemieux, they're scoring big numbers in goals. Back in Ovechkin's early days, Crosby would give you like the 30-40. Ovechkin would then jump up to 50-60, and then nobody would even sniff 25 because it was so hard to score. So Ovechkin's then done it year after year after year, been continuously consistent. And even in his down years, he's throwing 30 up there. So yeah, he is the most prolific goal scorer, even if he would get hurt tomorrow and doesn't break the record for me. He's going to break this record, though. Clearly, he wants to hang around to do this. Clearly, he wants to do it in Washington, even if he had a better cup chance elsewhere. Clearly, they are dug into doing it with him. So that all needs celebrated. He's one of the best. He's maybe the best scorer of all time. He's one of the best players of all time, even though maybe others are ranked ahead of him for maybe overall player that they are. But Ovechkin needs fully celebrated. And separately from that, George, I actually will throw this as a homework assignment to your friend Alex, because I saw that as well on Twitter.
Yeah.
And this goes off of what I just said at the top of my mind here. So obviously you're just talking Washington and best Washington athlete all time. That certainly could be said for Ovechkin. We all know that area, that media market also encompasses Virginia, Maryland, the DMV area. After I just spoke, and people are going to maybe cry and throw a chair here because there's a love affair with some of those guys of Ray Lewis and what he did for his position in that franchise.
You want to expand it to the whole region.
And Cal Ripken Jr. I want Alex to give me his rank.
Baltimore.
DMV. So, and not college, pro, DMV, DC, Maryland, and Virginia. Greatest athletes of all time ranked. Where does he have Ovechkin there? And the reason why I want to say that, George, and I want to throw this out quickly because I can almost guarantee he's going to say number 2 or 3, maybe number 3.
You're lumping Baltimore in, but
I'm 100% lumping Baltimore in. The reason why I'm giving this as an assignment, and I would love to hear his thoughts. Mm-hmm. I can argue Ovechkin over Ripken or Larry Lewis. I can argue Ovechkin still is 1. If he gets that Gretzky record, I could still argue Ovechkin 1. I almost guarantee you Alex is going to say he's 3, but I can argue he's still 1.
Yeah.
I can argue. That's why I'm not scared of you saying, well, you're giving me Baltimore. I understand who's in Baltimore. I get Baltimore. You can even go to other Orioles greats beyond just Ripken. He can give me Ovechkin at like 9th or 10th. I'd be curious where he has him. But I do think if you're talking about breaking one of those hallowed records in sports, as you said it, Ovechkin is the only one.
It's him and Ripken, the top 2.
Well, because let me put it this way, George. I think Ray Lewis is in there because if you're going to say,
I'll throw you. Let me throw you my 3 more as just off the top of my head here. But yeah, Ovechkin is still 1 for me. Cal is number 2. Again, different echelon. Yeah. I'm going to Baltimore football. I'll go Ray 3. I'll go Johnny Unitas 4. and then
Yeah,
I'll
because
go
Baltimore Colts, sure.
and then I'll go Walter Johnson. Again, the Commanders / Redskins, there's nobody in the history of that franchise that is terribly generationally transformative. They've had great players. They've had Hall of Fame
Yeah, Art
players,
Monk you could bring up as well. He got
players,
screwed out of the Hall of Fame.
all
forever.
great players, but none of them are none of them are on the echelon of those 5 guys I just gave you.
Yeah, and my list is probably similar. My case for Ovechkin is simple, and you kind of alluded to it earlier. People, because I would bet the majority of friends you ask in that area are going to say Ripken or Lewis is 1. They're going to put Ovechkin 2 or 3. I'm just going to guess that because hockey is not as popular, as you mentioned. And I also do think, George, there is a love affair with Ripken, regardless of where he ranks as a player. I actually could argue he's overrated historically because of the love affair.
That's fair to say as well. Yeah.
So I think there's an emotional attachment that'll rank him ahead of Ovechkin here. But like you're telling me, there's no Alexander Ovechkin is going to retire as the greatest goal scorer of all time,
hockey,
and like a top 10 all time player, right?
Yep.
Cal Ripken Jr. is not the greatest shortstop of all time.
Correct.
Cal Ripken Jr. is
not a top.
I could argue not the top 3 shortstop of all time. Cal Ripken Jr. If we're talking 90s and all the great players that played in that era, George. I mean, off the top of my head, I don't even know if Cal Ripken's the top 15 player in the whole decade. I mean, it's not that he's not a Hall of Famer. The streak is hard, 400 plus home runs. He did win the Orioles their last championship when he was very young as a part of that group. I get it.
All-star games, all that stuff.
But the last 6 years, he was pretty much an old man that was hanging on as the second best player on the team. Sure. The 2001 thing was a ceremonial situation. He should never have been on that squad. Like, there is a love affair with him. And I get baseball has a love affair, and I get what he meant to the area. But he was not better at his position than what Ovechkin's doing in his sport. No. The argument, I think, is sounder for Ray Lewis because you could argue Ray Lewis is the best linebacker ever. I don't think so. You could argue it. Yeah. And you also could argue that that was an expansion franchise, even though they did, I understand, move from the Browns to the Ravens, and you're coming off that, but they lost the history of the Browns. It's backed with Cleveland. So technically, Baltimore Colts, but he made that Ravens franchise a thing.
Yes.
That if they didn't win right away, that could be nothing. So he is by far the greatest player in his franchise history.
Yes.
And maybe arguably the best at his position. You could argue Ray Lewis for sure.
Yes.
Ovechkin is also the greatest player in his franchise history and one of the best ever in his sport and the greatest at his thing of scoring goals regardless of position. Cal Ripken Jr. is arguably neither of those things. So, you could still maybe say greatest Oriole, but you could argue against it. He's certainly not the greatest in his position. He's certainly not the greatest of the decade. I could argue against him being the greatest Oriole if I want to.
Brooks Robinson. Might be a greater Oriole than Cal Ripken. I mean, that franchise has been blessed with a lot of.
There's a lot there. Robinson, Palmer. There's a lot there you could certainly go to. But again, I do think Ovechkin, because we're talking about Washington. I don't think you need to cling to it. I'd throw out the hot take. I'd love for Al to throw it up on the DC area airwaves there. Just say it. Best of the region. It's not just Washington. I think he has had a better legacy than the other two that will undoubtedly get him phone calls at that TV station if he says it. But I like to hear at least what he would say, because I think that somebody from that area is going to have a hard time not having an emotional attachment to the other two.
Alex is a Marylander too, so he can appreciate the context and the nuance in it too.
Okay. Yeah. I think if Ovechkin did his exact career, best at a thing, winning the first championship, etc., and it wasn't hockey, then it would be one. But that area is going to cling to football and baseball. Ahead of hockey, especially when it's Orioles, who are an historic franchise. And a lot of the Washington National fans were, let's face it, they don't want to admit this, they were rooting for the Orioles for a while. Yeah. So that they have a love affair with Ripken. Yep. But I don't even think it's close between Ripken and Ovechkin, if you want to be honest. The way we're talking, I'm out of it even being close. Yeah. I think Ovechkin's the best of the area. So that's what I'm saying. What I'm saying. If you're having a parade for a man retiring, I need that energy times 10 for this record. We'll see. We'll see if I get it. I might even come down there for this. I'm ready for it. I'm coming down there for this.
Can only hope. A ceremony is to follow if he does indeed pass Wayne Gretzky.
More than one ceremony I require.
The unreachable star. More than one ceremony.
I need one at the game, and then I need a separate thing that is just going on. I need him like down the street holding something that signifies this.
Take him back.
Gotta get Wayne there. Gotta get somebody with the last name Howe there.
Yeah.
I need.
Love it. Endorse. Support. Endorse. Yep.
Yeah.
That will put a nice bow on this edition of the Howitzer and Buzzsaw show.
Might make it Ripken and Ray Lewis should be at the damn game.
Oh, okay. All right. Get all the luminaries out. Doug Williams, he'll show up just because like he's the guy.
Yeah. We know not to go top 5 all time. We get grandchildren of people who are dead. Let's go buck wild over here.
My son Self Jr. shows up. Why the hell not?
Yeah.
A reminder that you can find us wherever you get your podcasts.
Gilbert Arenas back. You can host
Spotify.
Got to represent the NBA a little bit here, but it was hard. And
oh man. Find us where you get your podcast. Search Howitzer Buzzsaw there. Also, shout out to Kellen B. Conley, whose music you hear right here on the HBS. His latest album dropping this week. Go and check it out at -universe.com.
Of course, find us on socials at Mike Asti 11, at Gerbo 3, at Howitzer Buzzsaw. Find us where you get your podcasts. And if you can't find us, you're just not trying hard enough.
This has been another edition of the Howitzer and Buzzsaw show, where we conquer draft grades, playoff brackets, and sports radio.
One day at a time.